All right, guys, welcome back. We're here again for our bi-weekly visit with Fish East Live. And tonight, it's time to fly. We all know that fly fishing is probably one of the longest standing, definitely traditional types of fishing here on the East Coast. But fly fishing has a lot more to offer than most of us think of. When we think fly fishing, we're thinking salmon and we're thinking playing around in the back little streams and creeks looking for brook trout. We have our co-host, Matt Zito, and a couple guests who are going to help bring us up to speed on just how much more there is to fly fishing in the or on the East Coast today. So if Matt's ready, we're going to bring him in. And
hey, Donnie.
How you doing tonight, Matt?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, can't complain. I'm here on another Thursday night talking fishing, so that's never a bad thing.
Never a bad thing. No, it's always fun.
So, no, it's Jason Wilcox off work early. Glad I made it in time. Jason, always love to have you, man. You're great at throwing out questions and keeping our guests on their toes. And, we'd love to have you on again sometime in the very near future. So, Matt, tonight we're going to kind of blow the myths out from behind things. A lot of people think fly fishing, they think salmon and trout, and that's where they stop. Mm-hmm. And you and I both know that there's a lot more to it than that.
There is, there's a lot of opportunities for fly fishermen aside from trout and salmon. I mean, I've said it before on this show, and I've said it to many people, like trout and salmon are always at heart for me. That's always my number one, but there's so many other great experiences to have and lots of other fish to catch on a fly. So I'm excited to talk about that and share what I know.
Yeah, I'm excited because, you and I spent some time together. You tried, I'll say with moderate success, to get me casting with a fly rod when we were down in Cape Breton this past year. I promise you, I intend to work on that. I am going to get better. And I did succeed in getting one fish on a fly this year. We will talk about that later. But I have seen, I'm not going to say I've seen the light because I still love my bait casters. I still love my spinning gear. But I've seen that I am missing on something by not having a fly rod in my hand at least once in a while. So
yeah,
before you and I ramble on all night, because you know we both are capable of it, I have to apologize in advance. You're a little outnumbered tonight. You're our lone Nova Scotian tonight, but we have two great guests from right here in New Brunswick, both avid fly fishermen, at least when the time is right, the season is right. Let's bring in Jeff Rathburn and Mr. Ben Thornton.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Donnie. Hey, Matt.
How you guys doing tonight?
Oh, pretty good.
Not bad. Talking fishing, so it's going to be a good evening.
Yeah, well, it's warmer inside in front of the laptop than it is outside. And we talked about ice fishing 2 weeks ago. Gerald Foster from, Gerald, we had you on not that long ago. 4 p.m. here on Vancouver Island, snowed for 10 minutes today. We feel so sorry for you, Gerald. Oh, come back east, my friend. Gerald from Shane's Blackwater. We had them on in our support local episode 1. And Gerald, good to hear from you. Nice to see you checking in from the West Coast, even if you are just doing it to rub it in. So, guys, I guess before we get too in-depth into specifics, because there's a lot to fly fishing, just the same as there is the other styles of fishing, whether I'm picking a bait casting rod and reel or a spinning rod and reel. You have to know what you're using for what you're targeting. But if you had to pick a basic setup for a beginner, if you're going to say, okay, I want to go out and target a number of species, where do I start? So I'll just throw this out there and any one of you can take it. I want to know, where would you start? Me, as a beginner, I don't own a fly rod. I've only had one in my hand 2 or 3 times. What should I be shopping for?
Oh, really? My first fly rod was a 9-foot 7-weight, and it caught everything from smallmouth to yellow perch to brook trout, everything in the middle. it's a nice medium weighted rod. It's not too heavy. It's not too long. Some of the shorter fly rods can get a little hectic in some tight spots to try and get them cast. But, you know, if you're just a beginner, you're looking for an open cow field with a stream running through it anyway. So that's my recommendation, be a 9'7" weight. You know, Matt and Ben can comment. That's what I would tell somebody.
Yeah, I'm right in the same boat too. I'm 9'7" weight or 9'8" weight you could pretty much target any species in New Brunswick on the fly rod with a 9'8" weight or 7 weight. Besides obviously like a muskie or a big striper. But anything else, you're fighting a good fish right there. And I mean, some big salmon or big trout could take you to the cork, but other than that, it's a good all-around fly rod.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it really depends on what you're going to target. But if you're looking for something that can kind of target everything, I think here in Nova Scotia, I'd probably go to a 6 weight, like a 9'6" weight. You know, that's great for smallies, good for pickerel, good for trout, maybe a little oversized for like your smaller trout. And, you know, basically aside from striped bass or salmon, you know, you can basically target majority of the fish here. But a 7 or 8 weight would do it too, but that would be pretty heavy for trout. So if I had to pick, probably 6 weight for Nova Scotia. If you just want to catch some smallies, you know, there's all the lakes here have smallies. You know, it's good for trout too. So I'd probably go with a 6 weight Nova Scotia. You guys sound like you got bigger fish out there going with 7 and 8 weights, maybe.
Don't be jealous, Matt. Hopefully things get cleared up with this COVID foolishness and we can travel a little more freely and we can get you up here. Great to see. I saw some comments popping up across the bottom of the screen. Shout out and hello to the guys watching in Newfoundland, Northern Ontario. I saw, you know, great to have people watching from all across different parts of this great country. So we've got BC, we've got Newfoundland, we've got it, you know, at least the bookends, and you know, Ontario and the Maritimes. We're filling in some pretty good chunks of the middle too. So welcome to all of you if it's your first time tuning in. I know Newfoundland, some great fishing over there. Northern Ontario, have had the pleasure of traveling up there, but haven't got on the water, which is sad because I was next to some phenomenal fisheries. So I guess to not ramble on, a basic setup. I guess opinions are varying slightly, but you're saying 9 foot, either 6 or 7. Anything specific a beginner should be looking for in a reel? You know, I don't know. Like I said, I know nothing about the gear other than a little bit that Matt and I talked about when we were down in Cape Breton. So if I'm a stone cold beginner, what am I looking for in a reel without breaking the bank?
I think as long as the reel has a good drag system, as long as it's like there's some fairly inexpensive reels out there. As long as you've got some kind of a drag system to stop a fish, I think that's really more than you need. It's always nice to have a lighter fly rod. You know, it helps at the end of the day. You know, with casting so much. But I think really that's the most important. If you got a good drag system. You know, like we get into some decent sized smallies here on, you know, you might need the drag to stop it. I know, you know, just speaking for stripers, as long as your reel can stop the fish, it doesn't matter if it's $50 or $500. If it can stop the fish, that's all you really need, you know?
No, yeah, no, I would recommend. I agree. Look. Yeah. No, I agree. It's you know, a good drag system on. It's the same as a bait casting or a spinning reel. You get what you pay for to a point. You know, I've got a couple of fly reels downstairs that are older than I am, that were handed down to me from my grandfather, and the only drag that's on it is the palm of your hand. You know, just you're palming that reel to stop a 4-pound smallie from running up into 6 inches of water and busting you off. The reels today, I mean, as long as the reel, the line and the backing and everything all matches to a point fairly close to the line that you're throwing and the weight of the rod, you know, you can spend $120 on a reel, or you can spend $720 on a reel. put it in your hand, make sure it feels good, it's nice and smooth, and it's got a decent back drag on it.
I'm a little biased when it comes to reels because I like the old stuff, the stuff that makes a lot of noise, like your old Hardys or Farlows. So hearing those things go, I mean, whether it has drag or not, that's something special because it just shows you how much a reel's developed over the years. So when it comes to fly reels, I do go for the older stuff, or try to at least. But the boys are right. Like, you got to have something with sealed drag if you're just getting into fly fishing. You're trying to learn the ropes, I guess. A nice beginner fly reel would be like an Orvis Clearwater for like it's $200 reel for the best bang for your buck. Like it's all metal reel with a wicked drag. Like I caught a 30-pound Atlantic salmon on the Rescue Goose on an Orvis Clearwater. Nothing special. It's a $250 fly reel. Fought the fish for 45 minutes to an hour on it, and like it took a few runs and it held up just as good as a $800 fly reel.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess, yeah, I guess you're all in agreement on the drag system is really the biggest thing to look for a beginner. And like Ben mentioned, the Orvis Clearwater not breaking breaking the bank. So we have two parts of the equation. The third part, well, I guess there's four because you got to get down to the flies, but we're going to save that till later. But line. What am I looking for? I've heard about sinking line, floating line, sinking tips. There's so many different things. I mean, when I go looking for line for my bait caster, is it braid, fluorocarbon, mono? What am I putting on it? What am I using it for? And I assume that fly line is somewhat task specific as well.
Yeah.
Most beginners I find go with a weight forward and floating line. That's what I did anyway. And it gets you your cast development with that weight forwarded tapered line. I know when I first started, that's what my dad set me up with my little Mitchell rod and my Fluger Trident thing. Looked like a set of Krager rims off a 79 Camaro. It must have weighed 700 pounds, but he put on a 9-weight floated tapered front tapered line on it, and you could backcast that. And as long as you knew where 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock were on your watch and where that rod was going, you could cast that out for a joke. With a little practice, of course.
Yeah, just a little?
You're going to need some practice, yeah. It's not that bad.
I guess I need some more practice, and then not saying that Matt wasn't a good coach, he just didn't have a good student. So,
Ben, don't be so hard on yourself, Don.
That was an interesting weekend. We'll just put it that way. We'll wait for a few more details to come out when Fish East comes to air. So, Ben, do you have any recommendations from a line perspective? I know you have fished pretty much from the smallest to the biggest when it comes to fly fishing. So
really, it's depending on what you're going to target. Like Jeff said, like if you're just looking for an all-around fly rods beginning, like you're just looking to catch your smallmouth, trout, bass or perch, or like just an all-around, like a weight forward fly line is definitely the best bet. I find it makes a smoother cast, but there's definitely some older fellas that would like a double taper, I guess. That's used to be the tried and true. But once you get into specific species, then you have to, like, your line is almost more important than your rod, because you got to load your line up or your rod up with the line that's best suited for what you're going to be throwing for a fly, what you're targeting, all that. Like going through fly lines, like it's just once you get species specific, it's a never ending battle because you're always after the next best thing.
And wondering if there's one thing out there that works better than what you're doing. So
yeah.
I guess there's certain things that cover all fishermen, because it doesn't matter if you're a spin guy, a bait cast guy, or a fly guy. You're always looking for that next best thing. So, Matt, I want to bounce this one off of you to start. This is probably one that all three of you are going to touch on. But I know Jeff, he's very much a creek stream kind of guy. And Ben, well, he's got a couple specialties that we'll touch on afterwards. Matt, being the only Nova Scotian on the panel, give us a couple specific setups for the species you target. I know you have a variety, but let's go in a less common direction. Species people may not think about targeting on a fly rod.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly for trout, I have a 4-weight and a 5-weight. That's what I use. Weight forward lines, floating lines. I do have some sinking lines, but I usually just use those for trawling around to get the fly down. But for smallies and pickerel, actually for pickerel, I really use my 8-weight a lot, and not that a 5 or 6-weight couldn't handle it, because they can totally handle a pickerel or a smallie. But when you're targeting pickerel, as you know, if anyone has done it before, they're usually found in heavy cover. So if you hook a fish close to the cover on a 5-weight, you're probably not going to stop him, and you're not going to have the backbone in the rod to get him out if he gets into that stuff. So I use an 8-weight, and as soon as I set the hook, I'm immediately just trying to stop him or pull him out away from the cover, because if he gets in there, you're probably going to lose it. So, and I also throw bigger flies for the pickerel too. So the 8-weight helps. 7-weight would be perfect. I don't own one. I'm going to try to get one this year. And floating line, but I also have a spare spool with intermediate for the days where maybe they're not hitting on the surface. Maybe they want it, on the edge of the weed. So I'll throw that intermediate line and kind of let it go down. And basically, the same. Well, for smallies, I usually stick with my 5-weight mostly. I don't have anything in between that. I don't have a 6 or a 7. But I think anywhere from a 5, 6, or 7 would be good for smallies. And same thing, floating line for your top water action, and then something intermediate to kind of get the fly down a little bit. And then stripers, I recommend a 10-weight. I've said it many times before. An 8-weight will do it. Sure, you can land one, but I like having the backbone, especially fishing in the Stewiacke, lots of current.
Yep. And
I run an intermediate line there to get the fly down a bit. Floating line sometimes if they're high up in the water column. If I see a lot of spawning action, I don't like to go too deep, because you just run into foul hooking fish and stuff. So that's basically the setups I use. And like I mentioned before, make sure your drags have, or your reels have good drag. But really, I think your line is really what's going to help you out if you're starting to get into fly fishing. A quality line will make a big difference in your casting. And I know that from experience, because my first fly rod was just one of those cheap little put together combos, $50 at Canadian Tire, whatever it was. And the line is super light. And when I finally upgraded to, I think I bought like a $40 line. I was like, wow, this is like amazing. This line's so good. And then I went up to a $60 line. I was like, whoa, like I can cast way better with this. And now I'm up to, I have the Rio Gold. And what's that?
Don't depress anybody by talking about the price of your line. Or
okay, well, I got Rio Gold, which is up there in price, and the Guideline Bullet, and I mean, it's almost effortless now, the casting. So I think if you're starting out, save your money on the reel, make sure it's got a good drag, but put your money into a good quality fly line. That would be my biggest tip for anyone starting out.
So. And you definitely have proven it with the stripers. I think we have a picture ready, or not too far away. You have been known to put a bit of a bend in a fly rod down on the Stewiacke.
Yeah. Well, I like the 10-weight too, because on the Stewiacke at that time of the year, it's catch and release only. So, I don't really want to play them out too much. I use a 10-weight, and I crank the drag down. I just try to land them as quick as I can. I lose a lot of fish, I'm not going to lie, but I would rather lose them than play them out and kill them or stress them out. So I use the 10-weight, and yeah, you could see from that picture, like I'll put the pressure to them. And my fly rod was $70 off Amazon because the thought of me getting like a $500 fly rod and breaking it on one of those things, no way.
Yeah, that would definitely.
The Stewiacke is so hard on gear, so you don't need anything fancy for the Stewiacke.
You've mentioned that before. The mud, the silt in that brown chocolate milk colored water can be really hard on your gear. So
yeah, it coats your line and.
Yeah, keep that in mind too, folks, about where you're going to be fishing when you're thinking about spending big money on your gear. If you're going to be fishing that dirtied up chocolate milk water all the time, big money on your gear may not be the best option right out of the gate. Jeff, I'm going to bounce that same sort of question to you. Specific setup, like I said, I know you spend a lot of times beating the streams and creeks, even close to my house. And I know there's a couple different species that you target. So why don't you talk about what you use for those specific species in some smaller water?
Well, let's start with some real smaller water. Later in the summer, when those brookies and yellow perch and even some pretty good sized fall fish get up into those cooler streams because the rivers are a little bit too warm, I've actually got a 6'2" weight. that I'll trudge right down. That's off the 2 weight there. I'll actually trudge down and keep that fly in front of me and let the current just drift me down, and I'll walk right down the middle of the stream. And those really nice brook trout and bigger fall fish will lay underneath those alder bushes where people don't want to walk or they can't get a spinning rod in because they don't want to get their feet wet. That little 6'2" weight is awesome for that. I mean, you set the hook on a strip back and then you just kind of, the rod's really there just to hold the line. That's pretty much it. When you're talking getting into some of the sea run brookies up around your place, Donnie, and some of those awesome hard fighting American shad that we had so much fun with there this past spring. I mean, that was a day of all days. They were bright, they were fresh in from the salt. And that day I was using a 7'5" weight Streamside Elite with a 2-pound leader on, a 2-pound test monofilament leader, and just barely cast it out like a 1/64th ounce jig. Basically, it was a pink hair jig is what it was. And just, we went up the next weekend after that with my dad, because my dad's never caught a shad, and he had his 9 weight. That's the only fly rod he's got. I should have gave him my 2 weight to try out, but we just absolutely laid right into them again. They don't call them a poor man's tarpon for nothing, because they do jump, and it's a lot of fun fishing those American shad. Once you get tired with them, you can go to stay with the 7'5" weight, because you really don't know what you're going to get in the kind of a cases. You can get smallmouth. You go down a little bit further, you get pickerel, big yellow perch, massive white perch, some schoolie stripers, some sea run brookies. Heck, I've even caught 4 or 5 pound suckers drifting a nymph down over the bottom with that 5 weight of mine. And that's an all around great little rod for the upper kind of a cases, because it's a bigger river, but it's not crazy big. Like, you can stand out in the middle of it and only be waist deep. That's my setup for sea run brookies and specific location, I guess, at Kennebecasis River. If I go up down to St. George area and fish the macadamia, I'll usually take my 8 weight with me. It's a much bigger river. It's still got salmon in it. It's got giant smallmouth in it, and it's got great brook trout fishing in it. And you cast a fly down, like I was saying earlier, and you don't really know what you're going to get. You can catch a 16-inch fall fish. You can catch 4-pound smallmouth, or a 28-inch pickerel, or a 16 to 18-inch sea run brookie.
Now there's a monster, Jeff. Why don't you tell us a little more about this one?
That was last summer in a stretch of water I've never fished before, and it's literally behind my house. And that's on the Mispec River. It dumps out of First Lake, and First Lake's known for big browns. And a lot of guys troll streamers in the spring for big browns on First Lake. So I said, I don't have a boat that's legal to go in that body of water. So it was later in the summer. The water was really low. I just decided to go for a walk. And get my feet wet in that little river, and I just drifted a mayfly down in through. I think it was a mayfly. A picture of it's in that picture anyway. Doesn't matter. And I just kept getting this little fella rolling. He'd just come up and he just tapped the fly and he'd go back. He'd tap the fly and he'd go back. So I cast back in. Every time I drifted over this rock, he was there. So I timed him just right, set the hook. It's the smallest landlocked salmon I've ever caught in my life.
Yeah, no, and that's what I love about the East Coast is, I mean, we've talked bass, we've talked pickerel, we've talked trout, salmon. You know, I know Ben's got a couple other things upriver that he has a little fun with that you don't see everywhere in the province. And, you know, Nova Scotia is the same way. There's so many bodies of water, so many opportunities. You know, Jeff mentioned the Kennebecases, the Mispec. It's not just the St. John, the Miramichi, the Restigouche. There are so many other places to go. So, Ben, I know you do most of your fly fishing now. You said you started fly fishing quite young. But most of your fly fishing now is, from what I understand anyways, is done on the St. John River, or at least the St. John system.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I had the first fishing rod I ever had in my hand was a fly rod. I didn't start with the push button casting rod or a line with a worm on the end of it. I started fishing. It was a 5-weight or an 8-weight with Dad on the Duxton River. And that's all I knew. That's from the day I learned how to throw a fly. It was trout and trout only. I grew up like that. In the picture there, that's Steve Wilson. He's probably the biggest mentor of mine growing up, other than my father. As far as fly fishing goes, I learned the Meduxnaquag River. Here, it's a local river here in town. It's used to be one of the best trout, if not one of the only brown trout rivers in the province. And that's what I grew up and how I fell in love with fishing is walking and wading and canoeing that river since I was 5 or 6 or like just getting. That's how I learned, and it's been a long road, I guess, from there. I mean, everything has adapted, and I mean, I've watched the Meduxnaquag River go from a outstanding trout river, and I know there's people that might be watching this that have seen the decline in the Meduxnaquag. It's not something I want to go deep into because it's a touchy subject with me, because I've seen what it was at its best, and now I get to see what it is at its worst. I grew up fishing the Meduxnaquag, and but now I've branched off into bigger and toothier critters that take up a lot of time. But that being said, before I get started fishing with those, I guess we start off with trout and hopefully a little black salmon. But I spend a lot of time on the upper stretches of the Johnny here up Florenceville Way, targeting fish like that, big rainbows that they are an invasive species, but that have came in our system and predominantly is now the top trout species in the upper stretches of the St. John. And I spend a lot of time chasing those in May, early June. And I guess we're talking about setups. A couple setups whenever I go trout fishing, I have at least 2 rods with me, if not 3. I start out with I have a 10-foot 5-weight that is strictly a dry fly rod. That's all it does is a dry fly. It's got a dry fly on the end of it from whenever the hatches start falling, and that's it. Then most of the 90% of the time I'm fishing like a 9-foot 6-weight or a 7-weight with it's more my like wet fly light streamer rod that is used predominantly most of the time swinging flies through the pools, chasing rainbows or smallmouth. But when I'm up on the upper stretches, predominant, like I go up and say I want to fish smallmouth for an evening, I'm using a 9'8" weight because I am throwing bigger flies. I'm seeing. It's fun fishing, but you're seeing how big you can get a fly. How big of a fly can you catch a smallmouth on? It's a wicked fishery up there, especially in the early spring.
So, the rainbows. You say that they are an invasive species, and I don't want to get into that conversation too much. But I honestly don't know a lot about them. So I'm going to ask you one question, and then if you know the answer, great. If you don't, I'll have to use the fancy little Google machine and look it up. How long have they been in our system? How long have they been here?
I don't know the exact answer to that, and no one really knows. Some people, there's rumors that it's been a flood. There was a flood back in the 80s, maybe 90s, where a flood of a fish farm on the upper stretches in Florenceville, or I don't know the exact location. I haven't looked into it that much, I guess. But it was, people say, from a flood of a fish stocking, or like a fish hatchery, I guess, that caused the rainbows to escape. And they are so aggressive and they're almost like a warm water trout. They survive so well in our system now that they've taken over, and there's a lot, and they're big. There's a lot of them around, and they can get big.
Yeah, they definitely can. I mean, I know we targeted them down in Cape Breton, slightly different situation. We definitely saw some fat fish down there, and I've seen some pictures of yours, and I want to come pay you a visit this spring.
Anytime.
So, so many different setups, so many different species to target, whether it be stripers, or right down to Jeff's tiniest little landlocked salmon he's ever caught. There's one other thing, Ben. I've got to pull you back in for just a second. You knew I was going to do this. Muskie on the fly. I know you've targeted them. I know you've tried. Tell me a little bit about that experience and about what you use to target we'll say the apex predator, freshwater predator in New Brunswick waters.
The apex, I'd go as far as the apex predator in probably all of North America, let alone New Brunswick. Targeting a muskie on the fly. I don't know where to begin. It's one of those things where you have to take with a grain of salt. I see Jay Wilcox. He's in the chat there, but he was him and Marlon probably were the pioneers of the New Brunswick muskies on the fly. I personally don't have too much experience with them. I fish them on the fly. I have hooked one, but coming from a trout background, I've learned very quickly you do not trout set on a 40-inch muskie, because guaranteed you're just going to pull the fly right out of its mouth. But I guess the best way to put muskie fly fishing, not that it's a big step to get into, it's I've casted a bait caster all day at muskie, and I've also casted a fly at a muskie all day. And Brad Bowen put it best. Yeah, the best way to describe muskie fly fishing is take a 4x4 piece of wood and try and beat it in the ground. That's how tired you will be by the end of the day of fly fishing for muskies.
I guess, what are you using? If you're going to be that tired, just what are you swinging? Fly, line, rod? What kind of setup?
The setup I would recommend and I use is a 9'12" weight. Not so much. I mean, the fish will fight hard and they hit hard, but you're casting a 10 to 14-inch fly, and paired with that fly is a 450 to 500 grain fly line, which beginners might not know. It's just a heavy sinking line. Like, it's on the bottom of the river, just like that. And because your fly is so big, you want to get that fly down in the column where these fish are. You might be fishing 5 feet of water, you might be fishing 15, but you got to get it down in the water column where they are. And then once you get your fly line right, it's down like into my leader system. I run a chunk of big fluorocarbon, whether it's 100-pound or 130-pound, as a section of my leader, and all of my flies have a 10 to 12-inch wire leader on them that I switch. It's loop to loop essentially from the fluorocarbon to the fly or to the wire. That way I can switch a fly easy without having to retie wire on. I know some people run just a fluorocarbon leader or 4 muskies, but other than that, it's a big step when you go chasing the apex predator.
It definitely is, and I don't think it matters what type of gear you're using. If you're going to step to that level, you want to be ready to play, because when those fish take a hold, and I've had the opportunity to catch a couple now. When they grab on, you want to be ready, because they definitely will be.
Yeah.
So.
And it could be right at the boat with a foot of line left on your rod.
Yeah. It can be. We saw a couple hit that close, and like I said, I had the pleasure to be on the boat for 3. Only one of them was on my rod, but I had the pleasure to be on the boat for 3 this year, and it is a pretty cool experience. So I hope someday, I'm not going to tell you I'm going to target them on the fly, but I hope someday to at least get a chance to witness someone catching one on the fly, because I do think that would be pretty cool to see.
Here's for an example, a fly I tied last year. That's got 8 shanks in it, and it's about a foot long. And even after an hour of casting that, you're ready to switch back to a bait caster. But that's how you got to stick it out with the muskies.
Yeah, no, they definitely are a fish of patience, and something I do intend to spend a little more time targeting in the future. I don't think I'm going to get quite as far into it as you are, Ben, but not everybody has that level of commitment. And I live too far away from the good musky waters to focus just on them.
It's always worth the move.
I'm not even getting into that. So, pretty much everything we've talked about has been rivers, streams. I don't know how many of you guys have, but if you're going to fish a lake, what are you going to change as far as approaching a river or a stream with a fly rod, or approaching something like a lake? Matt, I know you live on a lake, so I'm going to toss this one in your direction first. Like I said, I'm watching this show, I listen to you guys, you're all giving me advice on rivers and streams, but I live next to a lake. What do I need to do differently?
You can use a lot of the same stuff, but I think the one thing that I've really kind of started to do in the last 2 years anyway is buy a sinking line, and not really so much for casting, but more for trawling. Like if I'm targeting trout, usually, that's if I'm trawling with a fly, it's for trout, or I don't know, landlocked salmon or something like that. But I've seen some good results since I started using sinking lines. And I think I wouldn't use them in a river. They're kind of cumbersome to cast. I know Ben was just mentioning he uses the 450 grain for muskie. That blows my mind. I couldn't even imagine that. So good on you, Ben. I wouldn't have any
workout.
Yeah, I'd imagine it is. Prior to that, I was using like weighted flies to try to get it down, but it just doesn't do the trick. It's not as good as having a sinking line when you're trawling. So right now, like if I'm trout fishing on a lake, I have a floating line, an intermediate, and then if I'm trolling and I want to get down, I use a sinking line. So that would be my setup for trout. I have 3 reels in the boat when I'm fishing trout in a lake, because sometimes you'll see them on the surface. You might get a little bit of cold weather. There's no hatch on, so I'll use the intermediate line to get down. And if I still can't find them, then we start a slow troll with some sinking lines to get the flies down.
Okay, and I got to jump in here for just a second, Matt, because this is probably going to be the only chance I get to throw this out there. We mentioned I did catch my first fish on a fly this year, and you're talking trolling with a sinking line, and that was the ticket. We were down in Cape Breton. So yes, I got my first fish on the fly, but it was not casting. I'm not going to lie to anyone. It was in a trolling situation, but we had a great day, a great few days chasing those Waikagama rainbows. And, so at least I can say I've had one fish on the fly in my life. I just have to pick and choose who I tell that it was casting or that it wasn't actually casting. And so, yeah, Matt had a little bit of success that weekend too. It was
couple fish.
What a phenomenal fishery that is down there in Cape Breton. If you haven't had a chance to get down there and explore, and I hope our friend from Newfoundland that was watching earlier, I hope he's still watching, because I hope that we get to continue our adventures and push a little further east and get on that big boat out of North Sydney and come over and spend a little time on the rock. So yeah. I think I need to practice my fly casting before we go there.
Yeah, but you got to give yourself credit. You fought that fish on a fly, and that's half the battle.
That was, I don't want to say too much, but yeah, that was an experience. I will put it that way. So,
yeah, it's a totally different feel on a fly rod. Even, if you're not used to battling a fish that's kind of pulling drag on you, it can kind of be a nerve-wracking experience.
Well, when you come from,
it's totally different, right?
When you come from a background of bait casters and spinning gear, you're talking gearing, you're talking mechanical advantage. And when all of a sudden I'm going against, I forget what we estimated that fish weighed, that it was 4 to 5 pounds on a 1-to-1 reel. I was only taking in however much line I could turn on that reel. The thought of, a muskie or even the stripers, like, that gets my gears turning, and I want to try it, but I'm also scared to death to try it. Because I think it definitely could humble a person very quickly. So, since I interrupted you, Matt, do you have any other advice on moving towards lakes and looking at that angle? Because if you don't, I'll throw it out quickly to Ben and Jeff too, to see, I don't know how much lake fishing they've done, but we'll go back to you since I was mean enough to interrupt.
I think, you would target a lake just like you would with spin gear. You're looking for the same things. You're fishing the same kind of areas, points, weed edges, rock piles, all that kind of same stuff. I think really the biggest difference is, if you're fishing a river, a lot of the times you're kind of letting the fly swing. You're casting on depending on how much current there is, a 45-degree angle or 90-degree angle, and just kind of following. We call it, like, if you're not familiar with what the swing is, you're basically casting across the river and basically you're pointing your rod at where the fly is, and you're kind of following it and just letting the fly kind of naturally kind of swing through the current. Well, you don't have that option in a lake. So it's a lot of, stripping the fly, bringing the fly in, sometimes it's depending on the conditions, you're stripping it really fast or, a little bit slower presentation. I think that's probably the main difference with that. And then, and then you can get into fly choices, all kinds of different fly choices. We can touch on that later, but I think that's probably the biggest difference between the two. Is there's a lot more work in lake fishing, a lot more stripping the fly in and testing different things, and a lot more cover that you can fish as opposed to a river. And the techniques are a little different. The flies you use might be a little bit different too.
Okay, well, we're going to get to types of flies here in a little bit. So, Jeff, Ben, either of you guys have anything to add, like I said, from a lake perspective?
Oh, Matt covered a lot of it to a point. It's basically the same as, getting in your boat or dredging the shoreline and looking for the same type of structure, species depending. That all takes a factor in it as well. Like, I know the guys down here on the Loch Lomond Lakes, they troll a lot of sinking lines with gray ghost streamers and big double hook streamers and stuff like that for big browns. And there's even a couple fellas that I know that run downriggers on their fly rods to get down to 80 feet summertime to get those big sucky browns that don't like to come up shallow, and which I've never seen before. So I've just seen that for the first time last summer. A guy running a 2-pound lead ball on a downrigger on a fly rod and trolling gray ghost streamers at 80 feet, which is insane. But anyway, it worked. He had two big, beautiful browns in his boat. But it, the same thing that Matt said. You're fishing the same thing as if you would with the spinning gear or bait casting gear. You're just, the flies are different. You're a little bit more species specific, and you're beating the bank. You might want to go with a bit of a longer rod too to get a bit of a longer cast out through there. But really, it's pretty much what Max said. You're working the fly more than you would be, say, in letting the water and the current work your fly than you would be in a stream.
Okay, Ben, did you have anything to add, or
I don't have much experience on the fly on the lakes. I guess you could kind of call fly fishing for muskies and stripping a fly for muskies kind of lake fishing, because we're never really in the fast current per se, but it's all about how you work the fly and how you strip it. And a big thing with that is movement of the fly. Like, how is your fly in the water? You can tie. I personally tie flies, and you could tie a fly that looks amazing on the vise and get it out in the water, and it just comes in as straight as a stick. Like, it's all in a matter of what you're, especially if you're strip fishing, like on a lake or a like slack body of water. It's all in how your fly's moving and how you're stripping it. Like, that's the biggest thing, where you're the actual one making the movement of your fly, compared to in a river system, a flowing river system, the river's making your fly move.
So you're saying basically what I'm gathering is the biggest change. You say there might be a difference in fly, but if you're in a lake, you don't have current, you've got to put more effort into it because the water system is not going to do it for you.
Right.
So, okay. I mean, it makes sense. Something's got to move that lure or that fly, no different than when you're fishing with traditional or other gear. There's got to be a certain amount of action. I appreciate that advice, guys. And, I think there'll be some other people out there who are considering it and they're hitting a different body of water. Maybe they live close to a lake and that's where they start and they don't understand why they're not getting bites. That there definitely could be the reason why. Saw a couple comments popping up when we were talking about the mechanical advantage or lack thereof. Devin Bustard was saying very large arbor reels can compensate for the lack of gearing if you're bringing line in quickly. So if someone's looking to fight bigger fish and possibly have to bring line in a little faster, then that could be an advantage. Mr. Wilcox chiming in again, talking about pickerel fishing on lakes being his favorite. And Jay, I'm sure, well, I wouldn't say he spends more time on the water than anyone I know, because I know a lot of guys who spend a lot of time on the water, but he definitely puts in his time. And our buddy Nate Dewsum, yellow perch up shallow on light gear. And that actually is something coming from a background of bass and pickerel over the last year or so. I've learned a lot, even with spinning gear, the difference in the experience in going with lighter gear. If I catch a perch on my bass rods, they're a nuisance. I get no fight because my rod's too stiff, my line's too heavy. But when you use the right gear for the right fish, lighter or heavier, depending on the application, it totally changes the experience. So, I could see yellow perch at the right time can be crazy aggressive. So I could see that. I could see that being a lot of fun. The next one, I know you guys all do both types of fishing, whether it be spin and bait cast. Matt, I still got to get you on a bait caster.
I got all kinds in the basement.
Yeah, exactly. But spin or bait cast and fly. Ben, let's start with you. What do you see on the fly fishing side as the main advantages of a fly rod over a spinning rod or a bait caster? And obviously scenario is going to dictate a certain amount.
Scenario, yeah. I guess movement of a fly compared to, let's say, a spinning rod bait or a bait casting bait, to me is the biggest improvement. Now, coming from a fly fishing background, growing up with solely fly fishing, but after learning and getting into musky fishing, running a bait caster, you still doesn't matter the size of fly, what the fly is. A fly, depending on how it's worked, in my opinion, is always going to have more movement and more action than, let's say, a crankbait or a tube. Like, the movement you get out of a fly rather than out of a hard bait is a lot different, I guess. And it seems to be more, in my opinion, from running both here the past few years. Just the movement of a fly is much greater.
Okay, so your flies got more action than, say, a soft plastic, or, like you say, a hard bait that you're going to use on a spinning rod or a bait caster. I guess while I'm picking on you, what is the biggest disadvantage to a fly rod compared to spinning or casting gear?
Practicality, I would say. You can't always go and cast a fly rod. Like, if it's blowing 40, you're not going to go out and chuck a fly all day. I mean, the most relaxing thing to do in a river is stand in a river and swing a fly down through the pool. But if it's blowing 40, no one wants to do it, because you're risking your ears, for one, of a fly ringing around your ears, and two, it's just you got to put so much more effort into casting that, where if you had a spinning rod or a bait casting reel, you let the rod do the work. You don't have to have the best, like, it's more practical, and like, you need a back cast. You need 40 feet behind you to make a cast if you're throwing long line on a fly rod, whereas a bait cast or a spinning rod, you need 2 feet behind you. So it just practicality can sometimes come into play. Now, there are specific fly lines that can help with that, whether it's a heavy, like a spay or a spay light line that you can roll cast with, or switch line, I guess what I was looking for, that can help with the back cast room. But other than that, it's practicality.
Okay, fair enough. And I mean, that's to me sounds like a good, honest opinion. And from what I have seen, I can't go from experience, but from what I've seen, I would say that's pretty accurate. Jeff, I'll throw the same two questions at you real quick. Advantage to a fly rod, disadvantage to a fly rod.
Well, the advantage to a fly rod is, for me anyway, it's like what Ben said. When you're standing on the river all by yourself, or in a canoe or small stretch of water, it's quiet. It's one of the most relaxing things I like to do after a long winter. And maybe my boat's not ready, or the ice isn't off the St. John River yet. I love them both. I really, truly do. I know the question's not which one would you prefer, but I guess my brain's kind of going that way. I love them both, but advantages to me, there's nothing like trudging down a stream all by yourself, and all of a sudden you trout set that first roll of the season, and it's something you possibly had tied, and you threw that fly right in the right spot, or you read the water right, or there's all these different weird things that go on in my head anyway. And when it comes together, it's pretty satisfactory. If I'm out in a boat, fishing spinning gear, or even beating the bank for trout with spinning gear, I'm putting that lure or spoon or worm or wherever in front of the fish's face and getting them to bite. But it's just that fighting the fish on a long, noodly, soft fly rod with this great big rope-looking line going through it, and having the fish come right back up and swim between your legs, and you're trying to strip that back and catch up with the fish and turn around, and you're wading in 6 feet of water with a 3-mile-an-hour current. It's just different. And maybe that's just why I enjoy it so much in the spring. But it disadvantages definitely your back cast. You got to have some room. And for a newbie, like, you got the spot right down the street from your house, so you can learn to fly cast with a cow field behind you, and the worst thing you're going to hook might be a flying squirrel. So I mean, that's the big disadvantage is you need some room. And that's why I went and got that 6'2" weight, and just let the fly float 20, 30 feet in front of me. And you can still go and trench those tight alder covered streams and don't have to worry about even casting. You can get a little barrel cast in or a roll cast every now and then, but that's about it.
So I know we spent some time, and actually it was the first time I had ever picked up a fly rod and cast when we were up in Bathurst this year. We went up there, we fished Miscou Island, then we fished in Bathurst itself. And that evening, the gentleman that we were with from Bass Attack, and they took us out, and it was the most serene, grounding, I think, experience of my life when it comes to time around the water. We didn't have a single fish, but Matthew Roy from Bass Attack took us out, and it was when you're wading 400 feet offshore, technically in the ocean, because we were in the Bay de Chaleur. It's flat, calm. I don't know if we've got any pictures pulled up in the back. I know there was some beautiful shots taken that night. But it really was a back to basics. I don't think I've ever felt more connected with the water, even though there wasn't a fish to be had. So yeah, my own personal experience saying that's an advantage of a fly rod, I would definitely agree. Matt, I don't mean to jump on your, but just as Jeff was talking about that and as Ben talked about, it just made me think of that night and just how incredible it was. So Matt, same question to you before I continue to babble. There we are. That was that night. We went out and we stayed out until it was almost dark. We had to find our way back in before it got any more dark, or we wouldn't have been able to see our way back in. And that's a bad time for someone to trip wearing a set of waders. So, but yeah, Matt, I'm going to bounce this off to you and say disadvantages or advantage first, and then disadvantage of fly rods or fly fishing in general.
Well, advantage, I think, kind of is for me species specific. I definitely think with trout, I would give the advantage to fly rod. I mean, live bait excluded. If we're talking just no live bait, I'd definitely give the advantage to the fly rod for trout. And matter of fact, I would probably give it the advantage over live bait as well, because I've been in situations where there's trout on a mayfly hatch, and this is prior to me really getting into fly fishing. Worm and a bobber right out where the fish are, and they're literally rolling over the bobber for mayflies and won't touch the worm. They won't even consider it. A really quick story. I think it was maybe my second year really like kind of getting into fly fishing for trout, and we went to a lake one night and there was a mayfly hatch on, and I think we got 2 fish and we had worms, and those fish all evening. Like I'm telling you, like everywhere, by the boat, over the bobber, everywhere. So we went back the next evening. I had my little Walmart fly rod. It wasn't very good at casting. Get it maybe 25 feet out with a mayfly, and we got about 10 fish. And the only difference is that the mayfly that were on the water were kind of like a beige, yellow, cream color, and I only had black ones in my box. And even that difference made all the difference in the world to the fish. So I think what I'm trying to say is with trout, it's easier to match the hatch. I mean, trout mostly eat flies and insects, and it's way easier to do that, whether it's dry fly, nymphs, or whatever on a fly. So I give the advantage to that. But you're at a disadvantage with, say, smallies when they're down on a drop-off or something 25 feet down, and you got a fly rod. Even with a sinking line, it's really hard to get it down there and keep it in the strike zone. Because, I know we all spin fish, and I know like there's days where you got to put the drop shot right in their face and very finesse before you'll get a hit. So you're at a big disadvantage there with a fly rod. And then with pickerel, you're at a disadvantage because a lot of the times they're tucked right into the heavy cover and you just can't put a fly in there. If you put it in there and give it a few strips, you're stuck in the lily pads. Now there are flies that I fish that are on the surface with like a guard on the hook, but it's just not the same as throwing like a Texas rig bait in there and ripping them out with 20 to 30 pound braid. So there's a few disadvantages species specific, and then of course the backcast, like everyone said. But in saying that, I mean, there's, in my opinion, and I love both equally. I do both equally. I always have my fly rod and my spin gear normally. There's no better feel than fighting a fish on a fly rod. It's just way more intimate than it is on a spin rod. You feel every movement of the fish. It's definitely more difficult playing a larger fish because, if they turn and come at you to pick up the line, I mean, sometimes you go from reeling to stripping the line real quick. I've even had times where you got to put the line in your teeth and try to get the rod up just to keep the line tight. But that's the challenge of it that I like. And really, when I first started and I'm watching guys really cast the fly, it's just an art form. You see some of these guys, I know some of these guys that just throw a line like it's nothing out there. And it's just really cool to watch. But I think species specific, there's disadvantages mostly when the fish are deeper. I think, if the fish are deep, whether it's trout or bass or pickerel or whatever you're fishing, you're at an immediate disadvantage right away.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, my experience with fly is very limited. I talked about that night up in Bathurst. I talked about the one fish down in Cape Breton. The connection to nature, the sense of accomplishment, because it is a much more, I don't want to use the term mechanical, direct contact to that fish. I can turn the reel on my bait caster and bring in 8 inches of line in one crank. So I've got a much more direct connection to that fish and the fight. So it's almost like the sense of accomplishment and satisfaction to go along with it when you land a good fish on the fly rod, from what little bit I've seen, but from listening to you guys talk over time as well. I think that will be something that always attracts people to fly fishing. I know it definitely has, hooked me, so to speak, that I want to spend a little more time exploring it. I'm not putting my other stuff away. I just need to diversify. So we're running short on time, guys. We're going to be, in the 10 to 15 minutes left. So if you each could pick one fly, and that was the only fly you could throw for the rest of your life, what would it be? Matt, we'll start with you.
That's an impossible question to answer, Donnie. That's really tough. Oh, man. There's if you're not familiar with fly, it was coming. I knew it was coming.
I didn't know pickerel taco was the name of a fly.
You know what? Maybe I'll try to. I'm not a good fly tyer, but maybe I'll make one up and call it the fish taco. There's so many flies. I would dare say there's more flies out there than there are lures. So, but if I had to pick one, I'm just thinking all around that could catch every species, probably a muddler minnow of some type, or a zonker, which is basically a muddler with a rabbit tail on it. Yeah, a conehead zuddler. That's what I would pick. It's like a muddler with a rabbit tail and a weight at the front. I've caught so many fish on those flies. My buddy gives me a pile of them. He ties up beautiful zuddler flies, weighted zuddler flies. So I think if I had to pick, I'd pick that one because I'm pretty sure it could catch every fish here in Nova Scotia without a doubt. So yeah, something like that. Woolly bugger also would catch everything. So
you're only allowed one. You're only allowed one.
Fine. I'm back to the weighted zuddler.
Okay. Peter Stoddard says Olive Muddler caught everything on it. Nate's out there chiming in with Lester the Lobster. We've seen those ones. And
on the Bredor, certainly. So I only fished the Bredor the rest of my life for sure.
Yeah, Jason Wilcox is saying Muddler as well. That seems to be a popular one. Jeff, when Matt said Muddler, you kind of threw your hands in the air like he was stealing your thunder.
Not at all. I mean, look at what Peter Stoddard said. Olive Muddler. I'm gonna show you a fly that a friend of mine, Eddie Gallagher, tied for me years and years ago. This isn't the exact one. His had a touch of orange in the tail, but that's an olive muddler.
Hold it back just a little bit.
Right there.
There we go.
This fly's been beat all to hell. That's why it looks the way it does. But this fly in particular with a little bit of an orange tail and that copper flash you can see right there, I've outfished live bait with that specific fly on brook trout, brown trout, smallmouth, yellow perch, white perch, so many times I can't even count. So if I had to have one fly in my boat or in my fly box, it'd be the Eddie Gallagher olive muddler with copper flash.
Nice plug for Eddie Gallagher fly and his ties. I'm sure he'll appreciate that. He's going to get calls tomorrow for 600 olive muddlers.
I hope he does.
Ben, that leaves you. And I know you fish from big to small. So this is going to be a tough choice for you. One fly and one fly only.
And you guys, I could say a muddler or a woolly bugger any day. But if I had one fly, no matter the size, to pick, be a game changer. That's the name of the fly, a game changer. Mm-hmm. It's Blaine Chocolate's pattern. He came up with it. And the big musky fly that I showed earlier that had 10 shanks in it is a game changer. It's essentially just there's one hook followed by a lot of shank. And now here's one that's tied by my good buddy Marlin. That's a trout size. It's in the 4 to 6 inch range. And they're making them even smaller now. Like you could catch right from, because I got to cover.
Oh, what's Matt holding up there?
That's exactly one of the small ones you're probably talking about. Yeah,
exactly.
That is actually a Blaine chocolate fly there.
Yeah. So like from, I got to fish a fly that's could be a size 10 all the way up to a 8/0 fly. And it's kind of tough because I could say muddler minnow because you could tie a muddler minnow musky fly. But if I had one fly to choose for the rest of my life, it'd be a game changer. I'd have confidence taking that onto a salmon river and hooking a salmon with it.
Very nice. Very nice. And I knew that question was going to put you all on the spot because it would be no different than asking me if I had to go out and pick just one soft plastic to throw for smallmouth. Christian, if I could throw only one, it would be a dry fly. Otherwise, I'll just spin cast. Nothing better than a fish taking a dry off the surface.
Yeah, there's nothing better. 100% nothing better.
Oh, yeah. We've got Devin Bustard again, the Chubby Chernobyl. I don't want to know how they come up with some of these names. The Chubby Chernobyl is the best hopper pattern for trout, in my opinion. If I could only fish one pattern, it would have to be a dry fly for summer like that. So,
it's hard to beat a dry fly.
Does anyone know what a Chubby Chernobyl is?
It's a big foam-looking dry fly, essentially. That is insane.
Mm-hmm.
I fish a dry fly for the rest of my life too. There's been countless, like that rainbow that was earlier in the podcast that was up on the screen. It was one of those mornings where you could feel not the moisture, but like what's the word I can't think of the word.
Mist on the water?
Mist, yes, coming in the air. And I was up there with a couple friends, and you casting, going through the pool with streamers and woolly buggers, and nothing was happening. And then all of a sudden, it was just like a flip, like a light switch flipped, and the bugs and that started coming off the water. And I've never ran so fast to my truck to get a different rod. Like I was down on the water. I only had my streamer set up. And I said, I'm going to go get a dry fly because I know what's about to happen. And as soon as I got back down there, I found one rising fish that would not stop eating. Turns out, made one cast right over it. Because with dry flies, especially on a rising rainbow or a brown, there's you don't have very long. And if you spook that fly with a bad cast or a cast not in the right spot, you could be screwed. That fish could go. But you make the right cast, and that's what could happen is a big brown or a rainbow.
Very nice.
Totally,
very nice.
Totally agree. There's nothing better than you see a fish coming up at a fly, and you go through the fly box. What's going to work? You're looking at the flies in the water. You try to match it, and then you get within casting distance. You put the fly there, and you just see him sip it. There's no greater feeling than like mission accomplished. Because if you throw the wrong fly, if it's the wrong size, the wrong color, he might not eat it. And like Ben said, like you got a good chance of spooking that fish. And once you spook it, it's over. You ruined it.
You have one chance. That's it.
Yeah.
I've been on the Meduxicate, it's a lot of slate rock, and I've been leaning on rock ledges trying to get my fly rod flipped up over a rock and line landing, just the fly landing on the water, because that's how finicky some of these browns can be. It's like you get that one chance, and as you see the V coming out of the water of a big trout, and all you see is the eyes, and then it just take it back down, it's game on then, because you got to get back out of what you got yourself into, standing on a rock ledge in a lot of water.
No, guys, I know we can talk all night, and we talk about some serious stuff, but then you get talking into different experiences that you've had. It's just something that anyone who loves fishing could sit and talk about this all night. And what I really love about shows like tonight is the variety of what we talked about, and this really highlights what we're trying to do with Fish East. This is East Coast multi-species. I mean, we've talked about everything from little tiny trout, big big musky stripers, and everything in between, and then your traditional trout and salmon. And that's just, if it swims and we can throw a hook of some sort at it, and I don't care what style rod it's on, that's what we want to do. And I can't thank you guys for coming on. Can't thank you enough for coming on. It's been a lot of fun tonight, and I'm sure we're going to talk again very soon. And as I said, well, Jeff, you and I are already making plans to fish together this year a little bit. Ben, when those rainbows are going to run, just kind of drop me a little reminder, because my memory's kind of short.
Just remember, though, when rainbows are running, you could have a insane smallmouth fishing day mixed right in with it.
I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly all right with that. So, Jeff Rathburn, Ben Thornton, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As always, it's been a pleasure.
Cheers,
and we will see you guys next time. Let's get ready. Hopefully, we're going to see some open water sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night, gentlemen. Matt, as always, it's an hour and 15 minutes goes by really quick. It's hard to believe that 75 minutes and it's gone.
I know there's so much more you could talk about. You could talk about fly selection and when to use them, but we're always around too. So if anyone out there has questions, you can always reach out to one of us too, and we'd be glad to answer it for you.
Exactly, whether it be through our personal social media, the Fish East social media, we're accessible. Facebook, Instagram. Those of you who know us can reach out to us personally, because if I can't answer a question, I'll reach out to the guys who can, and I know Matt would do the same. So thank you again, Matt. We do this every 2 weeks, and so we'll be back in 2 weeks' time, Thursday night, 8 o'clock, Fish East Live. Fish East, Atlantic Canadian multi-species. It doesn't get any better. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Fish on and Fish East.